Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, music lovers and audiophiles. Today I'll be discussing a sneak preview we recently had from Magnepan of a new approach they'll be taking to build on their reputation for outstanding performance and value. I hope you enjoy it. This video is going to be somewhat different from a normal product review video that we do. We'll be talking about a product, but we'll mostly be talking about a technical strategy that's going to be behind some future products. So let me address what I think Magnepan is trying to do. To put it in a nutshell, my impression is that Magnepan is trying to change the view of their loudspeakers from good for the money, or even great for the money, to just plain great. Because the final products aren't done, what I want to address in this video is the question, do they have a reasonable strategy for doing this? Should it lead us to anticipate some interesting new products that will be coming down the pike? Now, you should understand that the Magnepan people haven't expressed their work this way. You could say, I would say, they just want to offer a few models of even better speakers for modern listening environments. That's nice, but after extensive discussions with Magnepan and listening to several prototypes, I think the question many audiophiles will want to think about is whether Magnepan is planning a new generation of speakers that address the but in the phrase, "they're great but," that's often used to explain why Magnepan speakers are relegated to what we might call the value zone. Could Magnepan's transition to being just plain great, and are there reasons that this might be a special version of great, not just another great speaker? Now, with value issues on the table, I should be clear that in modern audio there are many speakers that do exist and will exist at much higher price points, like 10x or more, than anything Magnepan is contemplating. So if this new approach works, it won't be by taking Magnepan's upmarket by much. In fact, as you'll see, this approach may not change overall Magnepan speaker pricing at all, but it may change performance substantially. Let me explain this unconventional plan a bit. Let's start with, why are Magnepan speakers potentially good high-end platforms? Many of us in the reviewer community have long held Magnepan speakers in high regard. Well, it's easy to say, and I think correct to say, they sound exceptional, especially when you take prices of their various models into account. That may not be sufficient for some audiophiles. You might like to know if there are some reasons why Magnepans sound good at their various price points. And critically, you might like to know if these strengths and weaknesses could allow a significant performance improvement to happen. There are reasons for the price performance of Magnepans, and I can appreciate that these may not be obvious and therefore may not be well understood. So, let's take a look at some distinctive elements of Magnepans. Magnepans are planar magnetic panel type speakers. But I think the assumed secret of Magnepans, which is their planar drivers, is actually not the prime mover per se. In other words, given the progress that's been made with cone drivers and cabinets, it isn't clear to me that such panel drivers are inherently lower distortion. Maybe yes, maybe no, but it's most likely that Magnepans have lower driver distortion in some measurements and higher in others. That may surprise you, but hold on, we're not done with explaining why Magnepans might be especially good for creating great speakers. So, let me say, Magnepans are also dipole radiators. This means that the front and rear sound output is essentially the same, although the front and rear are out of phase. So what? Well, the so what is that full-range dipoles like this come closer to the ideal of constant directivity than many speakers do. Constant directivity just means that the front, rear, and side radiation stays rather consistent from lower frequencies to higher frequencies. It helps to know that traditional box speakers usually don't have consistent output as you change frequencies. Cone box bass will tend to be omnidirectional, and their upper mid-range and upper treble will tend to be concentrated to the front, and the lower mids and lower treble will be closer to omni, but maybe not completely omni. Note that the directivity pattern of a speaker is one of those variables that can't be easily changed by the signal we send the speaker, whereas something like frequency balance can be. So the unusual directivity pattern that Magnepans have, if it's useful, would be an important factor in why Maggies might be a desirable platform for a move to the high end. But I really haven't answered, why is constant directivity important? Siegfried Linkwitz of Linkwitz-Riley crossover fame explained in several papers that changes in directivity with frequency tell your ear and brain where the speakers are. And you don't want that. You want your ear and brain to hear sounds as if they were coming from where they were recorded, or a simulation of that positioning. You want the speakers to disappear. Magnepan dipole radiation patterns help with this. It's not the only way to do it, but it is one way to get closer to what we want. To really understand what I'm talking about, you have to update your understanding of how stereo works. My Bach for Mac videos give some detail on how to update your view of how stereo works, and we'll put links in the description of this video. But a key summary point is that we have labeled spatial inaccuracies as one of the big four issues of audio reproduction, and Maggies might be well suited to addressing one of those, which is spatial accuracy, as I said. And there may be more, as you will soon see. That's because dipole radiation has another benefit. Another big problem is that room resonances are typically the most difficult to deal with in the bass range. And all rooms have bass resonances, and you won't fix this with better dimensional ratios, and you'll have a lot of work to do with treatments to make a dent in the problem. We all need, all the help we can get to deal with the problem of bass in real rooms. Well, note that dipoles tend to excite these room resonances less. That's because the bass from the front and the rear waves cancel each other, and so there is little bass radiation to the sides of the speaker, and therefore less energy exciting those nasty resonances. Now, another benefit of Magnepans is their inherently relatively low cost for their performance level, being constructed of a couple of diaphragms stretched across openings cut into a piece of wood. This isn't as easy to manufacture as it sounds, but the Magnepan open design is well suited to avoiding box resonances without the high cost of making a super inert cabinet. Relative to traditional box speakers, Magnepans have less cabinet work involved in their manufacturing because they basically have a frame, not a cabinet. So Magnepans may well have an inherent price-performance advantage within their operating range. Therein lies the tail, however. Since we're asking ourselves the question of whether Magnepans could really be great, let's ask first the question, if Magnepans are so good for the money, why doesn't everyone buy them? There are several reasons, of course, beside the fact that every speaker has specific voicing and some people prefer one sound profile over another. To enumerate the issues with Magnepans, let's start with Magnepans are relatively large, and not everyone has the space needed. Nor is everyone willing to accept the visual impact of such large speakers, even if they have the room for them. Another issue is that Magnepans are relatively inefficient, and thus have required large amplifiers to do their best. Fortunately, Magnepans have pretty high power handling, but the need for big amplifiers somewhat works against the value proposition we talked about earlier. 300 or 500 watts per channel just costs more than 50 or 100 watts for the most part. Another issue is that Magnepan, the company, has tended to be resolute in their focus on delivering high value, but this has, at times, probably limited their willingness to develop more complex and maybe more costly approaches to optimizing inherently good designs to make them even better. And then there's a big issue, maybe the big issue. Magnepan bass is inherently limited in the lowest octaves. Dipole speakers roll off at 6 dB per octave below a certain frequency set by their size. This roll-off can be compensated, but only above certain frequencies in the low or mid bass. Maggies might roll off at 80 Hz or 60 Hz. And as powerful bass has become a bigger and bigger element of music, this is a more problematic deficit for some listeners, because Magnepans, especially the smaller, lower-cost ones, have a significant bass roll-off. Just a brief interruption for some exciting news. AudioQuest has 3 new rack-mountable PowerQuest models that take AudioQuest's comprehensive approach to AC power conditioning, addressing noise linearly to provide class-leading wide bandwidth noise reduction at better than -22 dB. The PowerQuest line starts at $459.95 in the US for the PQ303 and goes up to $1299.95 for the PQ707, which includes transient power correction with up to 45 amps peak on-demand power for any amplifier. Visit audioquest.com for more information. And now, back to the show. All right, with that preamble sort of out of the way, let's ask whether these problems can be addressed without throwing the goodness of Magnepans out the window, the baby out with the bathwater, as it were. Magnepan, of course, thinks there is an approach to addressing these issues, but I want to caution that it's not a simple, silver bullet, super easy to understand approach. Magnepan has thought long and hard about what to do, and they've come up with a new approach, which I'm going to call open architecture active Magnepans. The intent is to continue manufacturing the current line of speakers, so those aren't going away at all. But they want to add related models that remove the passive crossover and are set up to be connected to electronics and supplementary speakers from a variety of manufacturers. That sets up the open architecture part of the equation. This means some Magnepan models will be able to be paired with electronic crossovers and multiple amplifiers. The crossovers could be done in DSP or in analog electronics. This could allow higher crossover slopes with complex crossover shapes, leading to even better, even more consistent radiation patterns. Electronic crossovers should also be more efficient, allowing lower amplifier power to be effective. Remember that the requirement for big amplifiers worked against the basic Maggie value proposition, the proposition of passive Maggies. Although I have to say with the open architecture active approach, more amplifier channels are needed. It just results in one smaller amp per driver instead of one big amp for the whole speaker. The active electronics packages could also contain DSP or other circuitry, allowing precise time alignment between the Magnepan drivers and between the Magnepans and future dipole woofers from a variety of manufacturers. DSP also offers the potential for room acoustic correction. Both of these ideas, dipole woofers and DSP acoustic adjustments, could be supplied by a variety of manufacturers in this open architecture ecosystem. That is, they don't have to come from the crossover or amplifier manufacturers, and likely will not come from Magnepan themselves. With an open architecture approach, crossovers, amplifiers, DSP software, and woofers can be designed by companies focusing on their areas of expertise. An open architecture approach also gives the consumer the ability to mix and match elements to make a system that fits the environment, their environment, For example, small woofers versus large woofers, or different amplification levels as needed for different room sizes, or to suit listener preferences for voicing. Speaking of voicing, the use of electronic crossovers and/or DSP makes small tweaks relatively easy. You might do this to suit individual setups and ancillary gear and source material like analog versus red book or high res. This may make purist skin crawl, but is something that many audiophiles are attempting to do with unnecessarily restrictive means. These modular options also help consumers to work with their available budget initially and then to grow their system sophistication as their budgets allow. Well, we really want to ask, you should want to ask, I want to ask, does this work? And I don't completely know. But we recently had a chance to hear a very early prototype of the open architecture Magnepans using open architecture 1.7i main speakers with a Danville Signal DSP Nexus audio processor working as a DAC, preamp, and crossover, along with special Danville Signal multi-channel power amps. This system showed really great promise in imaging and tonality and smoothness. We have also heard several dipole woofer demos using special cone woofer designs along with Magnepans. These again showed promise in extending the bass, detail, and characteristic pace of Magnepan midrange and treble, but extending it into the bass. When you combine this with bass power in the sub 40 Hz region, you have something musically pretty darn compelling. Now, I'm not the only one who's listened to this setup, so here is Cynthia Blankenship on her experience with the Danville Signal system electronics that I heard, but with custom dipole woofers used together with the Magnepan 1.7i open architecture speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cynthia the Audio Bell. I have a crazy setup to show you guys today, involving snake pits of cables, huge dipole woofers, Magnepan speakers, 4 amplifiers, and one very special crossover that managed this array of strange items in my house. The special crossover I speak of is the Danville DSP Nexus 2x8. The 2x8 is for 2 inputs and 8 outputs. I had never heard of Danville before, but right there before my ears was this sleek box filled with goodies. This system in a box gives you, as the user, a sandbox on which to build your own audio playground the way you want it to be. It's so customizable that you can set it and forget it, or you can get as deep in the weeds as you want to go using software called Audio Weaver. So, how did this audio playground end up in my living room? Well, both Magnepan and Danville call Minnesota home. Danville crafted a dipole woofer specifically for use with Magnepan 1.7i's, with their DSP Nexus at the heart of this setup. As a favor to Danville, Wendell and Galena of Magnepan offered to bring the Danville system to me in Oklahoma, as well as Tom Martin in Texas, in order to have a listen. Wendell and Galena embarked on a journey, camping across the country like a traveling audio caravan. This trip was a shakedown to see if they could combine their love of camping with their love of audio. When Wendell and Galena arrived at our house, we unboxed a ton of toys and set up a Frankenstein in the living room. Initially, we intended to use Danville's dipole woofer. However, we all thought it'd be more interesting to use Jeremy's DIY open baffle speakers with the Maggies. So the guys at Danville got on a conference call with us, remoted into a laptop they had lent to Wendell, and they tuned everything on the fly, removing and adding to their engineering topo, EQing things, and speaking in a language only engineers could understand. The end result was a sound system to be reckoned with. It was a wall of sound. The clarity and vocals projected by the Maggies were not suppressed by the giant woofers, and the woofers could still deliver the desired level of oomph to my listening experience that I prefer. For the first time with Maggie's, trying to get the best of both worlds in my room happened before my ears.
As always, we encourage you to form your own opinion. If you're attending Expona 2024, you can hear the Danville Signal Electronics with the Magnepan Open Architecture 1.7i speakers. They'll be in the Danville Signal room. That's room 356. This will be a demo without dipole woofers, so you can hear the lowest cost version of the idea. Speaking of cost, what about it? Well, no one knows, but from the right perspective, I think open architecture Magnepans could continue to be a winning value proposition in the Magnepan tradition. Of course, open architecture means various companies could hit various price points, so costs will probably cover a range. And if this system architecture can be as good as I think it might be, you probably want it to cover a range so you can get different quality levels and different technological approaches to wringing the most out of Magnepans. The system we heard used Magnepan 1.7i speakers without the passive crossover. In theory, this reduces the cost of the speakers, but since this may initially be a specialty item, let's assume the 1.7i open architecture model sells for the same $29.95 as the passive version. The Danville Signal Electronics we heard should be available for about $7,000. That might seem like a lot, but you have to consider all the elements that these boxes contain. A preamp, 8 channels of power amplification, a D to A converter of high specification, 4-way electronic crossovers for the 3-way 1.7i speaker and for a separate woofer, DSP power to do room correction and time alignment. If you compare this to the cost for a front end to a passive 1.7i system, you'd have to spend $1,000 or more for a preamp. You'd have to have a 250 to 300 watt per channel amp for $3,000 or more. You'd need a DAC, and that would be $1,000 or more. So that means that the extra cost for the open architecture approach, depending on how you count, might be an extra $2,000 or an extra $1,000 or an extra nothing. It might be the same cost. And you get DSP and amps for future woofers for relatively little money, essentially no money. That's why I say that if the open architecture approach has big benefits, it won't necessarily be due to going way up market. That said, the next big move is the addition of dipole cone woofers. These will probably not be inexpensive. I'm guessing somewhat, but woofers for a small to medium room could be in the $3,000 to $6,000 range, and for a large room, perhaps $10,000 or more. Again, the caveat that open architecture means different manufacturers can aim for different price points has to be repeated. There could be a much wider range than what I just said. And of course, manufacturers have to be enrolled in the project for those products to even exist at all. Open architecture is the way of the world in personal computing and phones, but volumes there are huge, and volumes in high-end audio are not. In summary, a complete Magnepan open architecture system could be on the market for under $20,000 and perhaps well below that. You'll have to be the judge of how it fits your budget, but the technical sophistication could create another value benchmark for Magnepan. Let us know in the comments if these technical previews are interesting, and perhaps we could do more of them. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please click on the subscribe button. Please click on the notification bell. Also, go to the description for a link to our weekly newsletters. And we'd love it if you would subscribe to the Absolute Sound magazine. We've been publishing it for over 50 years, and it contains some of our flagship work. Thanks for watching, and we hope to see you again soon.